The metal walls of the prison ship hummed with a low, threatening sound. Dr. Hyun-woo Park sat in his small cell, looking at his hands. They were still shaking from the trial. 3 days ago, he had been a respected scientist studying alien plants on the research station near Jupiter. Now he was a prisoner on a galactic council ship waiting to die. The charges were false. Hyun-woo knew it, and deep down he believed the aliens knew it too. Bioweapon smuggling. The word still felt strange in his mind. He had never made weapons. He had spent his whole life trying to understand living things, not destroy them. But the evidence looked bad. The alien plants in his lab had been twisted and changed by some kind of virus. When the council inspectors found them, they decided Hyun-woo must have created the virus on purpose. No one listened when he tried to explain that the virus had come from somewhere else. No one cared about his research showing that someone else had planted it in his lab. Humans were still new to the galaxy. Most alien species saw them as young and dangerous. When something went wrong, it was easy to blame the humans first and ask questions later. The cell door opened with a sharp hiss. Commander Tae-min Kang walked in, followed by 2 tall guards with blue skin and too many arms. Tae-min was human, but he worked for the Vrex Empire now. He had left Earth 20 years ago and never looked back. "Time to go, Park," Tae-min said. His voice was cold and empty. "The council is ready to see you." Hyun-woo stood up slowly. His legs felt weak. "Are they going to listen to my side of the story now?" Tae-min almost smiled, but there was no happiness in it. "They have already heard everything they need to hear. Today is about your punishment." The guards put heavy metal cuffs on Hyun-woo's wrists and ankles. The cuffs were connected by a short chain that made it hard to walk normally. They pushed him out of the cell and down a long hallway. The prison ship was huge. Hyun-woo had been on it for 3 days, but he had only seen his cell in the trial room. Now he walked through corridors filled with strange smells and sounds. Other prisoners watched him through the bars of their cells. Most were not human. Some looked like giant insects. Others looked like living rocks or moving plants. All of them had the same look in their eyes, the look of beings who had given up hope. They reached a large room with a high ceiling. In the center was a raised platform where 5 beings sat behind a curved desk. Hyun-woo recognized them from his trial. The Galactic Council members who would decide if he lived or died. The biggest one was Veltar, the Chitin Queen. She looked like a praying mantis the size of a car, with green skin that reflected the light like metal. Her large black eyes never blinked as she stared at Hyun-woo. Next to her sat something that looked like a collection of floating crystals. This was the Resonance, a being that spoke by making musical sounds with its crystal parts. Hyun-woo had needed a special device to understand what it said during the trial. The other 3 council members were from species Hyun-woo did not know well. One looked like a tree made of blue metal. Another was covered in thick fur and had 6 legs. The last one seemed to be made of living shadow, changing shape constantly. "Bring the human forward," Veltar said. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. The guards pushed Hyun-woo to a spot marked on the floor directly in front of the council. The chains around his ankles made a scraping sound on the metal floor. "Hyun-woo Park of Earth," the Resonance began, its crystal parts ringing like bells. "You have been found guilty of creating and transporting biological weapons. This is a crime against all life in the galaxy." "I did not create any weapons," Hyun-woo said. His voice sounded small in the big room. "Someone else put that virus in my lab. I was trying to find a cure for it, not use it as a weapon." The tree-like being leaned forward. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind blowing through leaves. "Humans always claim innocence. Your species has a history of violence and war. We cannot take the risk of letting you go free." "What risk?" Hyun-woo asked. "I am a scientist. I study plants. I have never hurt anyone in my life." Veltar made a sound like clicking metal. "That is what makes you dangerous. You have the knowledge to create terrible things, and your species has the will to use them. We have decided that you are too dangerous to live." Hyun-woo's heart began to beat faster. "You are going to execute me?" "Yes," said the shadow being, its form shifting like smoke. "But not in the usual way. We want to send a message to your species. Humans need to understand what happens when they threaten the peace of the galaxy." The furry 6-legged council member spoke next. "We will put you in a cell with a Void Stalker. It is a creature from the Andromeda sector. The perfect killing machine. No being has ever survived more than 30 seconds in the same space as one." Hyun-woo had heard of Void Stalkers in his studies. They were the most feared predators in known space. 12 feet tall, covered in scales harder than steel with claws that could cut through spaceship walls. They killed everything they met without exception. This is murder, Hyunwoo said. Not justice. This is an example, Veltar corrected. When the doors open and they find your remains, every human in the galaxy will know what happens to those who threaten us. The resonance rang out a complex melody that the translator turned into words. The Voidstalker has been without food for 3 days. It will be very hungry when you meet it. Commander Taemin stepped forward. The creature is called Saber. It was captured in a military action 2 years ago. Since then, it has killed 17 beings that were put in its cage. Some were warriors. Some were criminals. All died the same way. Why are you doing this? Hyunwoo asked, looking at Taemin. You are human too. Taemin's face did not change. I chose my side long ago. Humanity's future depends on learning its place in the galaxy. Sometimes examples must be made. The shadow being moved closer to the edge of the platform. Take him to level 9. Cell 7. Release the Voidstalker from its holding pen in 30 minutes. Record everything for broadcast to Earth. The guards grabbed Hyunwoo's arms and began to drag him away. He tried to think of something to say, some argument that might change their minds. But the trial had already shown him that the council was not interested in truth or justice. They wanted to make humans afraid. As they pulled him toward the door, Hyunwoo heard Veltar speak one last time. Perhaps this will teach your species that the galaxy belongs to those who have earned their place in it. Not to young races who play with forces they cannot understand. The door closed behind them with a sound like thunder. Hyunwoo was alone with his guards and his fear, walking toward what everyone believed would be certain death. In 30 minutes he would meet something that had never failed to kill, something that existed only to destroy. But as they walked through the cold corridors of the prison ship, one thought kept running through Hyunwoo's mind. He was a scientist. His job was to understand living things. Even if he was about to die, maybe he could learn something about this Voidstalker before the end. Maybe understanding would be enough. The elevator moved down through the prison ship like a falling stone. Hyunwoo watched the numbers change on the display. Level 5, Level 6, Level 7. Each number brought him closer to his death. The 2 guards stood beside him without speaking. Their blue skin looked almost black in the dim light of the elevator. Hyunwoo could smell their fear. Even these trained soldiers were nervous about going to Level 9. Level 9, the elevator announced in a cold machine voice. Maximum security containment. The doors opened with a soft sound. The hallway beyond was different from the rest of the ship. The walls were thicker. The lights were brighter and harsher. Everything here was built to hold the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. They walked past several empty cells. Each one had thick metal bars and warning signs in dozens of alien languages. Most of the signs had the same message: extreme danger, authorized personnel only. At the end of the hallway was a single massive door. It was twice as tall as a normal door and made of some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Above it, red letters spelled out Cell 7 in the common galactic language. One of the guards touched a control panel on the wall. A screen came to life, showing the inside of the cell. Hyunwoo looked at it and felt his breath catch in his throat. The cell was huge. It had to be at least 50 feet long and 30 feet wide. The floor was covered with scratches and dark stains that Hyunwoo did not want to think about. Broken pieces of metal and bone were scattered around the edges of the room. But it was what he saw in the far corner that made his heart race. The Voidstalker was bigger than he had imagined. Even lying down, it was taller than a man. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color from dark blue to black as it moved. Along its back, sharp spines rose like the fins of some ancient sea monster. But something was wrong. The creature was not moving much. It lay curled in the corner like a sick animal. Its breathing was slow and heavy. The bioluminescent markings along its sides, which should have been bright blue according to everything Hyunwoo had read, were barely glowing. It looked sick, Hyunwoo said. The first guard made a sound that might have been laughter. It is hungry. That makes it more dangerous, not less. The second guard was already opening the door. The sound of the locks disengaging was loud in the quiet hallway. Heavy metal bolts slid back with solid clicks. In you go, human, the first guard said. He pushed Hyunwoo toward the opening door. Hyunwoo stepped into the cell. The air inside was thick and warm. It smelled like metal, and something else he could not identify. Behind him, he heard the door begin to close. Wait, he called out. What about my chains? but the door sealed shut before anyone answered. The sound of the locks engaging again echoed through the cell. Hyun-woo was alone with the Void Stalker, still wearing the heavy cuffs and chains that made it almost impossible to move quickly. He stood very still, trying not to make any noise. The Void Stalker had not moved yet. Maybe it was sleeping. Maybe he had a few more minutes to think. Hyun-woo looked around the cell more carefully. The walls were smooth metal with no place to hide. There were no weapons, no tools, nothing that might help him. Just empty space and the creature in the corner. He took a small step forward, then another. The chains around his ankles made a soft clinking sound with each movement. Still, the Void Stalker did not react. From his studies, Hyun-woo knew that Void Stalkers had incredible hearing. They could detect a heartbeat from across a room. If this one was not responding to his movements, something was definitely wrong with it. He got closer, step by careful step. Now he was only 20 feet away from the creature. This close, he could see more details that worried him. The Void Stalker's scales were dull and some were missing entirely. There were old scars across its hide, and newer wounds that looked infected. Its claws, which should have been sharp and deadly, were broken and worn down to stubs. This was not a perfect killing machine. This was a sick, injured animal that had been kept in terrible conditions for far too long. The creature's breathing changed. It lifted its massive head and looked directly at Hyun-woo. For a moment, they stared at each other in complete silence. Hyun-woo had expected to see rage or hunger in those large yellow eyes. Instead, he saw something that shocked him. He saw intelligence and pain, and something that looked almost like sadness. The Void Stalker made a sound. It was not the roar or growl that Hyun-woo had expected. It was a low musical tone that seemed to come from deep in its chest. The sound was not threatening. If anything, it sounded questioning. Hyun-woo realized he was holding his breath. He let it out slowly and tried to think like a scientist instead of a scared prisoner. This creature had been alone in this cell for 2 years. It had been fed just enough to keep it alive, but not enough to keep it healthy. It had been used as an execution method, forced to kill 17 different beings. Each time, it had probably expected the new arrival to be a threat. But Hyun-woo was not acting like a threat. He was standing still, making himself appear small and non-aggressive. His chains meant he could not attack even if he wanted to. The Void Stalker made the musical sound again. This time there were different notes in it. Like a question with multiple parts, Hyun-woo took a chance. He sat down slowly on the floor, making himself even smaller. The movement made his chains rattle, but he kept his hands visible and open. "Hello," he said quietly. His voice sounded strange in the big empty cell. The creature's head tilted to one side. The motion reminded Hyun-woo of a curious dog or cat. The Void Stalker made another sound, softer this time. For the next hour, they stayed like that. Hyun-woo sitting cross-legged on the floor, the Void Stalker watching him from its corner. Neither of them moved much. Neither of them made threatening gestures. Slowly, the creature began to relax. Its breathing became more normal. The dim glow of its markings grew a little brighter. Hyun-woo began to speak in a low, calm voice. He told the creature about his home on Earth, about his work with plants, about the trial that had brought him here. He did not expect the Void Stalker to understand his words, but he hoped the tone of his voice would be soothing. The creature seemed to like the sound of his voice. When he stopped talking, it would make its musical sounds as if encouraging him to continue. As the hours passed, Hyun-woo made a discovery that changed everything. The Void Stalker was not just intelligent. It was trying to communicate with him. The different tones and patterns in its sounds were not random. They meant something. When Hyun-woo spoke in a high voice, the creature made higher sounds in response. When he spoke lower, it matched that tone. When he was quiet for a long time, it would make a questioning sound that seemed to ask why he had stopped. By the time the ship's lights dimmed to indicate night cycle, Hyun-woo had made up his mind. The galaxy thought this creature was a mindless killing machine, but sitting here in this cell, watching it try to communicate, he knew they were wrong. The Void Stalker was not a monster. It was a person, a lonely, hurt person who had been trapped and abused for years. And like any person who had suffered trauma, it needed help, not fear. As Hyun-woo settled down to sleep against the wall, the Void Stalker moved for the first time since he had entered the cell. It shifted its position so that it was facing him directly. Just before he closed his eyes, Hyun-woo heard something that made him smile. The creature was humming, a low, gentle sound that reminded him of his grandmother's lullabies. Tomorrow he would try to learn more about this strange person who everyone called a monster. Hyunwoo woke up to the sound of metal scraping against stone. He opened his eyes and saw the Void Stalker dragging something across the floor with one of its claws. The creature had moved closer during the night. Now it was only 10 feet away. The thing it was dragging was a piece of broken metal. As Hyunwoo watched, the creature used its claw to scratch marks into the floor. The marks were not random. They formed patterns, shapes that looked almost like writing. "Good morning," Hyunwoo said softly. The Void Stalker looked up at him and made a musical sound, 3 rising notes followed by 2 lower ones. It was the same pattern it had used yesterday when Hyunwoo first spoke to it. Hyunwoo sat up carefully. His body was stiff from sleeping on the hard floor, and the chains had left marks on his wrists and ankles, but he was alive. More than that, he was starting to understand. "You are trying to talk to me, are you not?" he asked. The creature made its 3-note sound again, then tapped the metal piece against the floor. Tap, 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 tap. The same pattern as its vocal sounds. Hyunwoo felt excitement rise in his chest. This was how real communication started. Not with words, but with patterns, with shared understanding that sounds and actions could have meaning. A slot in the wall opened with a hiss. 2 bowls slid out on a metal tray. One contained a gray paste that Hyunwoo recognized as standard prisoner food. The other held chunks of raw meat that were clearly meant for the Void Stalker, but the creature did not rush toward the food. Instead, it looked at Hyunwoo, then at the bowls, then back at Hyunwoo. It made a questioning sound. Hyunwoo understood. The Void Stalker was asking if it was safe to eat. After years of unpredictable feeding and punishment, it had learned to be cautious about when and how food appeared. "It is okay," Hyunwoo said. "Go ahead." The creature moved toward the bowls, but not in the way Hyunwoo expected. Instead of taking its own bowl, it picked up the one with the gray paste and brought it to Hyunwoo. Hyunwoo stared in amazement. The Void Stalker was trying to feed him first. "Thank you," he said, taking the bowl. The paste tasted terrible, but he ate it slowly, making sure the creature could see that he was grateful. Only after Hyunwoo had finished eating did the Void Stalker take its own meal. But even then, it did something strange. It bit off a small piece of meat and pushed it across the floor toward Hyunwoo. Hyunwoo looked at the raw meat. His human stomach turned at the thought of eating it, but he understood what the gesture meant. The creature was sharing its food. It was treating him like family. "I cannot eat that," Hyunwoo said gently, "but thank you for offering." The Void Stalker tilted its head and made a concerned sound. It pushed the meat closer to Hyunwoo, then made eating motions with its mouth. Hyunwoo realized the creature thought he was still hungry. In its mind, the small bowl of paste could not possibly be enough food for a living being. "I am okay," Hyunwoo said. He patted his stomach and made a satisfied sound. "Full, thank you." The creature seemed to understand. It pulled the meat back and ate it, but kept watching Hyunwoo with worried eyes. Over the next several days, their communication grew more complex. Hyunwoo learned that different tones meant different things. High, quick sounds meant excitement or curiosity. Low, slow sounds meant contentment or sadness. Sharp, cutting sounds meant pain or distress. The Void Stalker was a fast learner. It began to copy some of Hyunwoo's words, though its throat could not make all human sounds correctly. But it could match the emotional tone of his voice almost perfectly. Hyunwoo also learned more about the creature's condition. Its injuries were worse than he had first thought. Some of its scales were loose and infected. Its claws had been deliberately damaged to make them less dangerous. Worst of all, it had scars around its neck that looked like they came from some kind of shock collar. Using water from the drinking tube in the cell wall, Hyunwoo began to clean the creature's wounds. At first, the Void Stalker was nervous about being touched. But when it realized Hyunwoo was trying to help, it became very still and let him work. The cleaning process took hours each day. While he worked, Hyunwoo would talk or hum. He found that the creature especially liked low rhythmic sounds. When he hummed a Korean lullaby his grandmother used to sing, the Void Stalker would make harmonizing sounds that turned the simple melody into something beautiful and complex. It was during one of these cleaning sessions that Hyunwoo made his biggest discovery. He was working on a particularly bad infection on the creature's back when it suddenly made a sound he had never heard before. Not musical tones this time, but something that sounded almost like words. Burp. Hyunwoo stopped working. What did you say? The creature turned its head to look at him. Saber, it said more clearly. Saber, it was saying its own name. The guards had called it Saber, and somehow over 2 years of captivity, it had learned that this sound meant itself. Saber, Hyunwoo repeated. That is your name. The creature made happy sounds and nodded its massive head. My name is Hyunwoo, he said, pointing to himself. Saber tried to repeat it, but the sounds came out as Hyun-oo. Close enough. From that moment, everything changed. Once they had names for each other, real conversation became possible. It was not conversation in words, but in tones and gestures and shared understanding. Hyunwoo learned that Saber had been very young when it was captured. It had been taken from its family and forced to fight in illegal contests for the entertainment of wealthy aliens. The fights were not fair. Saber had been given weapons and drugs to make it more violent, then punished when it refused to kill unnecessarily. The worst part was the isolation. Void stalkers were social creatures who lived in family groups. Being alone for years had damaged Saber's mind almost as much as the physical abuse had damaged its body. But now Saber was not alone. For the first time in years, it had someone who treated it with kindness instead of fear, someone who saw it as a person instead of a weapon. Hyunwoo could see the changes day by day. Saber's scales were healing and becoming brighter. Its movements were stronger and more confident. Most importantly, the sadness in its eyes was being replaced by something Hyunwoo had not expected to see. Hope. On the 7th day, Saber brought Hyunwoo a gift. It was a small stone it had somehow loosened from the wall. The stone was smooth and perfectly round. To human eyes, it was just a rock. But Saber presented it to Hyunwoo with great ceremony, making formal musical sounds that clearly indicated this was something important. Hyunwoo accepted the stone with equal ceremony. Thank you, Saber. This is beautiful. Saber made pleased sounds and settled down next to Hyunwoo. For the first time since he had entered the cell, the Void Stalker allowed itself to truly relax. It lowered its great head until it was resting against Hyunwoo's leg. As Hyunwoo gently scratched behind Saber's ear holes, he thought about what the people watching them must be thinking. The cameras in the cell recorded everything. Somewhere, alien scientists and officials were watching a human bond with the galaxy's most feared predator. They probably thought he was crazy, or that he had some kind of special power over dangerous animals. But Hyunwoo knew the truth was much simpler. Saber was not dangerous because it was evil or mindless. It was dangerous because it was hurt and scared and alone. Take away the hurt, the fear, and the loneliness. And what remained was just a very large person who wanted the same things every person wanted. Safety. Kindness. Someone who understood them. As the ship's lights dimmed for another night cycle, Hyunwoo made a decision. He was supposed to be dead by now. The fact that he was alive meant something had gone wrong with the Council's plan. Maybe they would come for him soon. Maybe they would find another way to kill him. But until that happened, he would keep working. Not just to survive, but to prove something important. He would show the galaxy that their most feared monster was really just another person who needed help. And maybe, if he was very lucky, he could give Saber something it had not had in years. A friend. 3 weeks had passed since Hyunwoo entered the cell. He marked the days by scratching lines on the wall with a sharp piece of metal Saber had found for him. 21 lines. 21 days that he was supposed to have been dead. The changes in both of them were remarkable. Hyunwoo had lost weight, but he felt stronger somehow. His fear had been replaced by purpose. Each day brought new discoveries about Saber and its species. Saber looked like a completely different creature. Its scales now gleamed with health, shifting from deep blue to silver when it was happy. The infected wounds had healed, leaving only faint scars. Most dramatically, its bioluminescent markings had grown bright enough to provide light in the dark cell. But the biggest change was in how they communicated. Hyunwoo had created a basic language system using sounds, gestures, and simple drawings scratched into the floor. Saber learned quickly, adding its own modifications that made the system richer and more complex. They had words for basic needs like food and water and sleep. They had words for emotions like happy, sad, and worried. Most importantly, they had developed ways to talk about the past and future. That was how Hyunwoo learned the truth about Saber's life before captivity. Family, Saber said, using the low, warm tone that meant something precious and missed. It drew patterns in the floor dust with its claw. 8. 8 family. The patterns showed different sizes of void stalkers. 2 large ones that must have been parents, several smaller ones of different sizes. Brothers and sisters? Hyunwoo asked. Yes, brothers, sisters, pack. Saber's voice carried deep sadness when it said the word pack. Over several conversations, Hyunwoo pieced together Saber's story. Void stalkers lived in family groups of 6 to 12 individuals. They hunted together, raised their young together, and made decisions as a group. Saber had been the youngest in its pack, still learning to hunt when the raiders came. They took only young ones, Saber explained, its markings dimming with the painful memory. Young ones grow fast, learn to fight, worth more money. The raiders had been working for illegal fighting rings in the outer systems. Young void stalkers were prized because they could be trained to be more violent than adults who remembered their peaceful family life. Did they hurt you to make you fight? Hyunwoo asked gently. Saber's response was a sound Hyunwoo had never heard before, a harsh grinding noise that clearly meant something too terrible for their simple language to describe. But then Saber did something that broke Hyunwoo's heart. It moved closer to him and made the soft musical sound that meant safe now. It was comforting him, even while talking about its own trauma. That night, as they settled down to sleep, Saber asked a question that surprised Hyunwoo. Hyunwoo pack? Where Hyunwoo family? Hyunwoo thought about his answer. He had parents back on Earth, but he had not seen them in years. His work had taken him far from home. He had colleagues, but few close friends. My pack is small, he finally said. Far away, I chose to be alone to do my work. Saber made a puzzled sound. The concept of choosing to be alone was difficult for it to understand. Humans sometimes live alone, Hyunwoo explained. We do not need packs the way your people do. But even as he said it, Hyunwoo realized it was not entirely true. Sitting here with Saber, sharing food and warmth and conversation, he felt less alone than he had in years. Maybe humans needed packs too, just in different ways. The next morning brought an unexpected development. When the food slot opened, 3 bowls came out instead of 2. The third bowl contained something neither of them had seen before, a mixture of cooked meat and vegetables that smelled delicious. Saber sniffed the new food suspiciously. Trap? It asked. Maybe, Hyunwoo agreed. But why would they poison us after 3 weeks? They decided to risk it. The food was indeed delicious, the best meal either of them had eaten since entering the cell. But more importantly, it meant someone was paying attention to their needs. The answer came that afternoon. A section of the wall became transparent, revealing an observation room on the other side. Several figures stood behind the glass, watching them. Hyunwoo recognized some of them from the trial, but there were new faces too. One of the new observers was clearly human. A woman in a white coat who was taking notes on an electronic tablet. She looked familiar, but Hyunwoo could not place her. Saber noticed the observers too. Its markings dimmed and it moved protectively between Hyunwoo and the window. It is okay, Hyunwoo said, putting his hand on Saber's arm. They are just watching. But Saber's reaction told him this was not the first time they had been observed. The creature clearly had bad memories associated with being watched by groups of aliens. The observation lasted for about an hour. The humans and aliens in the room pointed at different things and had animated discussions. Hyunwoo wished he could hear what they were saying. After the observers left, Saber was agitated for the rest of the day. It paced around the cell and made worried sounds. Nothing Hyunwoo did seemed to calm it down. Finally, as the lights were dimming for the night, Saber spoke. They take you away, it said. Like before. They always take away, Hyunwoo understood. In Saber's experience, when the observers came to watch, it meant someone was about to be taken from the cell. Usually someone who was about to die. I am not going anywhere, Hyunwoo said firmly. We are packed now. Pack stays together. Saber looked at him with its large yellow eyes. Promise? It was the first time Saber had used that concept. The idea of a promise. A commitment that went beyond immediate needs or desires. I promise, Hyunwoo said. As long as I can choose, I stay with you. Saber made the sound that meant deep contentment. It curled up next to Hyunwoo, close enough that he could feel the warmth from its body. But as Hyunwoo listened to Saber's breathing slow into sleep, he wondered if it was a promise he could keep. The observers were clearly interested in what was happening in this cell. Sooner or later, they would want to interfere. The next few days brought more changes. The food improved again. The temperature in the cell was adjusted to be more comfortable. Most surprisingly, they received some simple supplies, clean water for washing, basic medical supplies, and even some materials that could be used for simple crafts. Hyunwoo used the new materials to make better tools for caring for Saber's remaining injuries. Saber, meanwhile, began creating what Hyunwoo could only call art. Using different colored dusts and small stones, Saber made patterns on the floor that were beautiful and complex. When Hyunwoo asked about them, Saber struggled to explain. Memory pictures, it finally said. Family stories. Important things. Hyunwoo realized he was looking at Saber's culture. These patterns were how Void Stalkers remembered and shared their history. Each design told a story, about family members, about important events, about the beliefs and values of their people. Can you teach me? Hyunwoo asked. Saber's markings brightened with pleasure. Yes, Hyunwoo learned pack stories. Become real pack. For the next week, Saber taught Hyunwoo the basics of its people's art. Each pattern had meanings within meanings. Colors represented different emotions or concepts. The placement of stones showed relationships between ideas. The size and complexity of designs indicated the importance of what they represented. It was during one of these lessons that Hyunwoo made a disturbing discovery. One of Saber's memory pictures showed a scene of violence, not hunting, which was natural for a predator species, but organized killing, battles between Void Stalkers and other creatures. What is this about? He asked. Saber's expression became sad and angry at the same time. War, long war. Saber people fight other people for many years. Why? Saber struggled with the complex ideas. Other people say Saber people too dangerous. Must be stopped. Must be controlled. It was a familiar story. The same fear and prejudice that had put Hyunwoo in this cell was what had started a war against Saber's entire species. Are your people still fighting? Do not know, Saber replied. Been here too long. Maybe pack all dead. Maybe war over. Maybe Saber last one. The possibility that it might be the last of its kind brought tears to Hyunwoo's eyes. He had grown to love this gentle, intelligent creature, who had been labeled a monster by the galaxy. The thought that there might be no others like Saber was heartbreaking. You are not alone, he said firmly. Even if we are the only ones left of our kinds in this place, we have each other. Saber touched Hyunwoo's face gently with the tip of one claw. Good pack leader, it said. Hyunwoo was about to correct the idea that he was a leader when he realized what Saber had really said. Not good pack member, but good pack leader. Saber was looking to him for guidance and protection. This massive, powerful predator saw him as the strong one in their relationship. The responsibility was overwhelming and humbling at the same time. But as Hyunwoo looked at his friend, his packmate, he knew he would do everything in his power to be worthy of that trust, even if it meant standing up to the entire galaxy. The final 12 hours began with Baram doing something that changed everything. The massive creature placed one clawed hand gently on Daehyun's forehead. Suddenly the human's mind filled with images that were not his own. Daehyun saw vast gardens stretching across entire continents. These were not the simple farms humans knew, but living artworks of impossible beauty. Trees that sang in the wind grew next to flowers that glowed like stars. Rivers flowed in perfect spirals, feeding plants that seemed to dance in the current. Every single living thing was placed with care and purpose. The Vorthak moved through these gardens like gentle giants. Their claws, which looked so dangerous, carefully pruned branches and planted seeds. Their telepathic abilities let them sense what each plant needed. They could feel the health of entire forests through the connection all living things shared. You are gardeners, Daehyun whispered in amazement. Baram's scales shifted to deep purple, a color that meant sadness and loss. More images flowed into Daehyun's mind. He saw the first ships arriving at Baram's world 300 years ago. The aliens who came did not understand what they were seeing. To them, the carefully arranged ecosystems looked wild and untamed. The visitors began taking samples. They dug up rare plants and captured unique animals. They built mining equipment that poisoned the water. They cut down ancient trees to make space for their temporary bases. The Vorthak tried to communicate. They sent gentle telepathic messages asking the visitors to be careful. But the aliens felt the mental touch and panicked. They thought the Vorthak were trying to control their minds. When words failed, the Vorthak tried to physically stop the damage. They stood between the mining equipment and their precious gardens. They used their size and strength to block the ships from taking more specimens. The aliens saw this as an attack. They called the Vorthak dangerous predators and spread warnings throughout the galaxy. Soon, more ships came with weapons instead of scientific equipment. Daehyun felt Bahram's pain as the images showed the war that followed. The Vorthak fought desperately to protect their worlds. Their telepathic abilities and natural weapons made them seem like monsters to those who did not understand. The galaxy learned to fear them as apex predators. "But you were just protecting your gardens," Daehyun said softly. Bahram showed him the aftermath. Many Vorthak worlds were abandoned. The survivors hid in the deepest parts of space, afraid to make contact with other species. Their beautiful gardens withered without proper care. Centuries of careful cultivation were lost forever. The creature's scales flickered with different colors as it shared more memories. Daehyun saw Bahram's own capture. The young Vorthak had been tending a small garden on an asteroid when the patrol ships found it. They thought Bahram was setting up some kind of dangerous outpost. The humans in the containment room's observation area watched in fascination as their screens picked up emotional readings from both beings. Captain Minho pressed his face against the glass, trying to understand what was happening. "His stress levels are dropping," Dr. Yuna reported, reading the medical monitors. "Both of them are showing signs of deep emotional bonding." Outside, Commander Jiwon studied the readouts with growing concern. Her entire career was built on the idea that Vorthak were the galaxy's greatest threat. Everything she believed was being challenged by what she saw in that room. Inside the chamber, Daehyun was learning more about Vorthak culture. They lived in family groups called pods, with each member having a special role in maintaining their gardens. Some were soil specialists, others understood water systems, and a few could communicate with the tiniest insects. Bahram had been a seed keeper, responsible for preserving rare plant varieties. The young Vorthak showed Daehyun memories of the vast seed vault it had been building before its capture. Thousands of species from across the galaxy, all carefully stored and cataloged. "That's why you understood the nutrition supplements so quickly," Daehyun realized. "You know about plant chemistry." The human felt a new image form in his mind. It was Earth seen from space, blue and green and beautiful, but there were dark patches where forests had been cut down and brown spots where deserts were spreading. "You want to help us," Daehyun said. Bahram's response was not in words but in feelings. The Vorthak felt deep sadness for any world that was losing its natural balance. They saw themselves as healers of planets, not conquerors of them. Daehyun shared his own memories then, thinking about the conservation work humans were trying to do on Earth. He showed Bahram the seed banks and nature preserves, the efforts to save endangered species and restore damaged ecosystems. The connection between them grew stronger. Both species faced the same challenge. They were trying to protect and nurture life in a galaxy that often valued profit over preservation. As the hours passed, Daehyun learned simple Vorthak communication. Different scale colors meant different things. Rapid flashing indicated excitement or urgency. Slow waves of color showed contentment or agreement. The patterns were like a visual language that supported their telepathic abilities. Bahram taught Daehyun how to sense the emotional states of the small plants growing in cracks in the chamber walls. With the Vorthak's help, the human could feel the tiny struggles of life trying to survive in the sterile environment. "We could work together," Daehyun suggested, "humans and Vorthak, sharing what we know about taking care of living worlds." Bahram's entire body glowed with soft golden light. It was the first time Daehyun had seen this color, and somehow he knew it meant hope. The final hours of their confinement were spent planning, not escape plans but dreams of cooperation. Bahram described garden techniques that could help restore Earth's damaged ecosystems. Daehyun explained human technology that could help Vorthak create new gardens on dead worlds. They imagined research stations where both species could work together. Humans could provide the technical knowledge while Vorthak offered their deep understanding of ecological balance. Together they could heal damaged worlds and create new ones. As the countdown timer showed less than an hour remaining, both beings felt the same emotion. They did not want this connection to end. In 3 days they had become more than friends. They had become partners in a shared dream of nurturing life throughout the galaxy. The observation screen showed Commander Jiwan approaching the chamber door, her hand hovering over the release controls. Soon the galaxy would learn the truth about what happened when a human was locked in with their most feared predator. The heavy metal doors of the containment chamber slid open with a deep mechanical hum. Commander Jiwan stepped back as the sealed air rushed out, bringing with it scents that should not have existed in a sterile prison cell. There was the smell of growing things, of earth and water and life. The assembled alien observers pressed forward, expecting to see the aftermath of a brutal fight. Their recording equipment was ready to document the scene for the Galactic Archives. 3 days ago, they had watched a human enter this chamber with the galaxy's most feared predator. Logic said only one would survive. They were right about that part. Only one had survived, but both Dahyun and Baram walked out of the chamber together. The human moved slowly, staying close to his massive companion. In his hands he carried several small packets of the nutrition supplements he had been preparing. Baram walked beside him with careful, measured steps, the creature's scales showing soft blues and greens that none of the observers had ever seen before. "Stay calm," Dahyun said quietly to the shocked aliens around them. "Baram won't hurt anyone unless threatened." Commander Jiwan stared at the scene before her. The human looked healthy and unharmed. His clothes were dirty but not torn. There were no signs of violence or struggle. The Vorthak moved with none of the aggressive postures described in military reports. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Captain Minho pushed through the crowd of observers, relief flooding his face when he saw his friend alive and well. Dr. Yuna followed close behind, her medical scanner already taking readings. "Dahyun, what happened in there?" Minho asked. Instead of answering immediately, Dahyun turned to Baram and placed his hand gently on the creature's arm. The Vorthak scales flickered through several colors, and Dahyun nodded as if receiving a message. "Baram says it's time for everyone to learn the truth," he replied. The human stepped forward, addressing the crowd of aliens who had gathered to witness his expected death. His voice was calm but carried clearly through the observation area. "Everything you believe about the Vorthak is wrong," Dahyun began. "They are not predators. They are gardeners. They are healers of worlds, not destroyers of them." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Several security officers reached for their weapons, but Commander Jiwan raised her hand to stop them. "Explain," she commanded. Dahyun looked at Baram, who moved closer to the human. The creature's presence was certainly imposing, but there was something gentle in its movements that had not been there before. 300 years ago, your people made first contact with the Vorthak on their homeworlds, Dahyun continued. But you didn't understand what you were seeing. The Vorthak had created paradise worlds, perfect ecosystems where every living thing had its place. He gestured to Baram, whose scales were now showing slow waves of deep purple. When your explorers began taking samples and building mining stations, they were destroying thousands of years of careful work. The Vorthak tried to communicate, but their telepathic abilities frightened you. When they tried to physically protect their gardens, you saw it as an attack. Dr. Yuna had been running her medical scanner over both beings. She looked up from the readings with amazement. "The biological data confirms it," she announced. "The Vorthak shows no signs of aggressive hunting adaptations. Its physical structure is more consistent with a builder species than a predator." Commander Jiwan stepped closer, her military training warring with the evidence before her eyes. "If this is true, then our entire galactic defense policy is based on false information." Baram made a soft, rumbling sound and extended one clawed hand toward the commander. She froze, but Dahyun nodded encouragingly. "Baram wants to share something with you," he said, "the same way it shared with me. You'll see the truth through its memories." The commander hesitated, then slowly reached out to touch the Vorthak's extended hand. The moment their skin made contact, her eyes went wide. Images flooded her mind. The same garden worlds and peaceful cultivation that Dahyun had witnessed. When the connection ended, Commander Jiwan stepped back with tears in her eyes. "We were so wrong," she whispered. "We destroyed their worlds and called them monsters for trying to protect them." The crowd of observers buzzed with confusion and growing understanding as the commander shared what she had experienced. Some demanded more proof, while others began to see the truth in Baram's calm behavior. Dahyun pulled out one of his nutrition packets and offered it to Baram, who accepted it gracefully. The simple act of feeding treats to the supposed apex predator sent a clear message to everyone watching. Bahram has been sick for months, Dahyun explained as his friend consumed the supplements. Poor nutrition and isolation caused the aggressive behavior you saw when it was first captured. All it needed was proper care and understanding. Captain Minho stepped forward, amazed by the transformation in both beings. What happens now? Before Dahyun could answer, Bahram placed its hand on his shoulder and shared another set of images. The human's face lit up with excitement. Bahram says there are other Vorthak hidden throughout the galaxy, he translated. They've been afraid to make contact, but if we can prove that peaceful cooperation is possible, they might be willing to come forward. Commander Jiwan nodded slowly. We'll need to completely revise our first contact protocols, and we'll need ambassadors who can communicate with them. I volunteer, Dahyun said immediately. As do I, added Dr. Yuna. Captain Minho grinned. Someone needs to keep you two out of trouble. Over the following hours, the group worked out the details of a new initiative. Dahyun would serve as the first interspecies understanding ambassador, with Bahram as his Vorthak counterpart. They would travel together to make contact with hidden Vorthak communities and begin the long process of healing centuries of mistrust. The story spread quickly through galactic communication networks. The human who had survived 3 days with an apex predator became famous, but not for the reasons anyone expected. He became known as the person who proved that understanding was more powerful than fear. 6 months later, Dahyun and Bahram stood together in a vast biodome on a neutral station near the galactic center. Around them grew plants from dozens of worlds arranged in the harmonious patterns that the Vorthak understood so well. Human botanists worked alongside Vorthak gardeners, learning techniques that could help restore damaged ecosystems throughout the galaxy. The project had attracted volunteers from many species, all eager to learn from beings they had once feared. The biodome became a symbol of what cooperation could achieve when different species chose understanding over suspicion. Dahyun watched as a group of young aliens from various worlds learned to communicate with the elderly Vorthak master gardener. The telepathic connection allowed for learning that went beyond words, sharing not just knowledge but the deep emotional connection to growing things that drove Vorthak culture. We did it, he said softly to Bahram, whose scales glowed with the golden light that meant hope fulfilled. His friend's response came not through telepathy, but through the universal language they had created together. All around them, the garden they had built sang with life, proving that the greatest predator in the galaxy was not violence but the power to nurture and grow.